Right, so the talk that I'm presenting today is about Syrian refugees, the situation with Syrian refugees, mainly in neighboring countries, so mainly in Jordan, Lebanon and Turkey, but also we'll look a little bit at the situation in Iraq, in Egypt, and of course how this is impacting European countries and the EU in particular. And the point that I'm trying to make is that the Syrian refugee situation has evolved a lot since really when it started, which was about 4 years ago, and that we are reaching kind of a certain maturity in the crisis. That means that a lot of the kind of policy implications have changed, and a lot of those changes are actually relatively recent, maybe in the last year or so, maybe even less. Looking at, so not only quantitatively the much higher number of refugees that we are now talking about, we probably over 4 million refugees, so people displaced outside of the Syrian borders. There is probably another 6 to 7 million IDPs, so internally displaced within Syria. But also because of the way in which now the consensus that had emerged very unintentionally, it's kind of unsaid consensus that had emerged regarding the crisis was that one of, we're going to try to help those refugees and kind of contain the situation to the neighboring countries based on the assumption that the Syrian crisis would find an end in a couple of years, and those refugees would be able to return. So a lot of the energy of the neighboring countries as well as institutions such as the EU was about trying to help the refugees where they are, and again just helping them cope temporarily and hoping that they would be able to return. Now this is no longer the case. I mean, there is not even too much of an attempt to find a political solution to the crisis in Syria, but it's not clear that governments have really understood that this means that we need to find different types of solutions for refugees. It is clear that neighboring countries, while the first 3 years have been kind of slowly adapting to the situation, realizing the size of the situation, and actually kind of developing and increasing the amount of rights that refugees would have and kind of access to basic services, we actually now see a reversal since the last year, as if there have been a number of kind of small tipping points that have been reached of governments, not being able to cope and not necessarily willing to cope as much. So Lebanon has kind of more or less closed the borders in the last 6 months. There are much more restrictions now with Jordan. The situation with Turkey is complicated. So we see this reversal of refugees that are not necessarily as, not that they've ever been fully welcome, but at least there was a space before really for them. The space seems to be shrinking. And so increasingly there is more focus on the role that the EU or different European countries could play, and there is more and more pressure from the international community for European countries to actually help, not only containing the situation to the region and helping refugees there, but helping them by actually resettling more and having some form of a quota system to resettle more Syrian refugees in Europe per se.
Juliette Tolay for the Institute of International Affairs. Thank you very much.
Thank you.